Captain Veltok stretched his forearms across the command console of the Relaxian warship, Silent Predator. The bridge hummed with quiet efficiency as his crew monitored the vast emptiness of space near Kepler Station. 3 cycles into their patrol, they had found nothing but empty cargo pods and space debris. That changed when Ensign Mortal's voice cut through the silence. "Captain, unregistered vessel on long-range sensors. Human configuration, running dark. Veltok's optical sensors, focused on the tactical display. A small cargo freighter drifted just outside the station's protective boundary, its transponder either damaged or deliberately disabled. The ship's hull bore the distinctive angular design favored by human engineers, built for durability rather than elegance. Distance? Veltok asked, his mandibles clicking with anticipation. 12,000 kilometers in closing. The vessel appears to be adrift, but our scans detect active life support and minimal power signatures. Lieutenant Kexra approached from the weapons station, her scaled hide reflecting the blue glow of the bridge displays. Another Deathworlder smuggling operation, most likely. These humans always think they can slip past our patrols. She checked, the charge level on her plasma rifle, the weapon's energy cell glowing a steady amber. According to Galactic Council behavioral files, their species typically surrenders when faced with superior firepower. Veltok had read those same files during his military training. Humans came from a heavy gravity world with a toxic atmosphere, and predators that would make most civilized species flee in terror. Yet despite their dangerous origins, psychological profiles suggested they possessed a practical streak that made them calculate odds before engaging in hopeless battles. "Prepare the boarding craft," Veltok ordered. "Standard enforcement protocol. 8 Marines full combat gear but set weapons to stun. We want them alive for questioning." The boarding party assembled in the launch bay within minutes. Veltok led the team personally, something he rarely did for routine smuggling interdictions. Something about this particular vessel felt different, though he could not identify why. Perhaps it was the way the ship drifted, not tumbling helplessly, like a truly disabled craft, but maintaining a stable orientation as if someone were still at the controls. The boarding craft crossed the gap between ships in less than 5 minutes. Veltok's Marines used magnetic clamps and plasma cutters to breach the cargo vessel's outer airlock, the metal parting like tissue paper under their advanced tools. Emergency lights flickered in the narrow corridors beyond, casting eerie shadows that danced with each movement. "Life signs detected," reported Corporal Zixhan, consulting his scanner. "Single human male located on the bridge. No other crew members detected." Veltok found this odd. Most human cargo vessels operated with crews of 3 to 5 individuals. A single operator suggested either extreme desperation or a very specialized mission. The team moved through the ship's cramped passages, noting the worn but well-maintained equipment. This was not a luxury vessel, but neither was it a piece of junk held together with hope and recycled parts. They reached the bridge to find their target exactly where the scanners had indicated. Kim Tae sat at the pilot station, his fingers moving steadily across the control interface despite the angry red stain spreading across his jumpsuit. The plasma wound on his left side should have sent him into shock, but his breathing remained controlled and his hands never trembled. "How is he still conscious?" whispered one of the Marines. Veltok stepped forward, his weapon trained on the human. "Step away from the console, human," he commanded in Galactic Standard, the universal language taught to all spacefaring species. Tae raised his head slowly, dark eyes meeting the captain's 4 optical sensors without fear or submission. Blood had begun to pool on the deck beneath his chair, yet his voice remained steady when he spoke. "Can't do that." The human's fingers never stopped moving across the keyboard. Red droplets fell from his wounded side onto the controls. But he continued his work with the same methodical precision Veltok might expect from a computer program. This was not the behavior described in any of the psychological profiles the captain had studied. "You are bleeding to death," Veltok observed. "Surrender now, and we will provide medical treatment." Tae actually smiled at this, though the expression held no warmth. "Death is not the worst thing that can happen to someone. Captain Veltok raised his plasma rifle and fired a controlled burst at the human's torso. The energy beam struck Tay center mass, the weapon designed to deliver enough neural disruption to drop any known species instantly. The captain expected to see the human collapse, unconscious but alive for interrogation. Instead, Tay simply grunted and shifted slightly in his chair. His left hand pressed briefly against the fresh burn mark on his chest, then returned to the keyboard. The typing never stopped. If anything, his fingers moved faster across the controls, entering what appeared to be cargo bay jettison sequences. "Impossible," whispered Marine Hoxenal, his scanner beeping frantically. The device's display showed critical readings that made no sense. "Captain, the medical scanners are detecting severe organ damage, internal bleeding, neural trauma, cellular disruption. By all rights, this creature should be unconscious or dead." Veltok stared at the human in disbelief. 3 decades of military service had taught him to trust his equipment. Relaxian medical scanners were the most advanced in the galaxy, capable of detecting life signs through several layers of ship armor. If the scanner said Tay was dying, then he was dying. Yet here the human sat, working as calmly as if he were filling out shipping manifests during a routine cargo run. "Stop what you are doing," Veltok ordered, raising the weapon's power setting. "This is your final warning." Tay completed his current sequence and reached for a large red lever mounted beside his chair. The manual cargo jettison control, designed for emergency situations when automated systems failed. His hand closed around the handle with steady determination. Veltok fired again, this time aiming for the human's shoulder. The plasma beam seared across Tay's upper arm, burning through fabric and flesh with surgical precision. The smell of cauterized tissue filled the small bridge. Any normal being would have screamed, would have recoiled from such agony. Tay's hand never wavered. He pulled the lever with the same smooth motion he might use to start his morning coffee maker. Warning lights began flashing throughout the ship as the cargo bay doors opened to vacuum. The computer's voice announced in mechanical tones that pressurization was lost, that cargo containers were being expelled into space. Through the deck plating, they could feel the vibrations of massive objects being launched from the vessel's belly. "Your species confuses pain with defeat," Tay said, his voice carrying an odd note of sympathy. He released the lever and turned back to his keyboard, beginning another sequence. "We learned the difference long ago." The words hit the Relaxian Marines like a physical blow. In their culture, as in most galactic civilizations, pain served as nature's warning system. When something hurt badly enough, you stopped doing it. When injury threatened death, survival instinct took over. It was basic evolutionary programming shared by every sentient species they had encountered, except, apparently, humans. Corporal Zixhan stepped forward, his own weapon trained on the bleeding figure. "Captain, our combat psychology training covered 17 different species. Nothing prepared us for this. What do we do with an enemy who continues fighting while dying?" Veltok found himself at a loss for words. Military doctrine was built on predictable responses to escalating force. Fire a warning shot. The enemy considers surrender. Inflict minor injury. They usually comply. Deliver potentially fatal damage. And any rational being would choose survival over whatever goal they had been pursuing. Tay was rewriting everything they thought they knew about combat behavior. The human finished another sequence and reached for a different control. This one appeared to be communications related, probably sending a message to whoever was expecting his cargo. More blood had pooled around his chair, yet his movements remained precise and purposeful. "How?" asked Marine Roxtel, her voice barely above a whisper. "How does he continue?" Tay glanced up from his work, those dark eyes focusing on each Marine in turn. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of absolute conviction. "Because some things matter more than personal comfort. Some things matter more than being afraid. Some things even matter more than dying." He returned to his controls, fingers dancing across keys slick with his own blood. The cargo ejection continued, container after container disappearing into the void of space. Whatever he was protecting, whatever mission he had accepted, he intended to complete it regardless of the cost to himself. The Relaxian Marines stood frozen, their weapons trained on a target who had already absorbed enough damage to kill him twice over. Yet he worked on, defying every law of biology and psychology they understood. The final cargo container tumbled away from the ship, spinning slowly as it joined the dozens of others now drifting in space around them. Tay's fingers completed the last command sequence, then his hands fell away from the keyboard. For a moment he sat perfectly still, as if listening to something only he could hear. Then his body simply gave up. He slumped forward in his chair, consciousness finally abandoning him after minutes of impossible endurance. The steady sound of his breathing became shallow and irregular. Blood continued to seep from his wounds, forming a dark pool that reflected the bridge's emergency lighting. Marine Hoxnell rushed forward with his medical scanner, the device chirping frantically as it analyzed the human's condition. "Captain, I'm reading massive internal hemorrhaging, severe neural trauma, and multiple organ failures. According to this, he should have died 12 minutes ago." Veltok approached the unconscious human, his forearms moving with careful precision as he examined the situation. The bridge console still glowed with active displays, showing the completion of whatever sequence Tay had been so desperate to finish. The captain's optical sensors focused on the main screen where a cargo manifest remained open. What was worth dying for? Veltok muttered, more to himself than to his Marines. He began scrolling through the manifest data, expecting to find illegal weapons, banned technology, or perhaps rare minerals stolen from restricted mining operations. What he found instead made him freeze completely. The list read like a medical supply catalog: 70 cases of broad-spectrum antiviral compounds, 30 water purification systems rated for colony-scale deployment, 200 emergency ration packs, 40 atmospheric scrubbers, medical diagnostic equipment, and emergency surgical supplies. Every item was perfectly legal, manufactured by licensed facilities throughout the galaxy. But the destination code made Veltok's mandibles click with sudden understanding. New Busan, he whispered, reading the shipping destination. System designation, Terra 779. Corporal Zixhan looked up from where he was trying to stabilize Tay's vital signs. Isn't that the human colony world under Galactic Council quarantine? The one with the plague outbreak? Veltok accessed his command database, pulling up the official council records on New Busan. The file painted a grim picture. 6 months ago, a biological outbreak had swept through the human colony world. The plague was aggressive, but not universally fatal, with a mortality rate hovering around 15%. However, it spread rapidly through population centers and overwhelmed the colony's limited medical infrastructure. The Galactic Council's response had been swift and decisive. Complete quarantine. No ships in or out until the outbreak burned itself out naturally. It was standard protocol for biological contamination events, designed to prevent the spread of unknown pathogens to other worlds. Tay stirred weakly on the floor where the Marines had moved him, his eyes opening just enough to focus on Veltok's face. When he spoke, his voice was barely audible. "The plague," he whispered, each word requiring tremendous effort. 8 million people on New Busan. Council says containment is safer than cure. The full weight of the situation hit Veltok like a physical blow. This human had not been running contraband or engaging in illegal smuggling. He had been attempting to deliver medical supplies to his own people, supplies that could potentially save thousands of lives. "The quarantine protocols," Veltok said slowly, understanding dawning in his voice. "You were violating council orders." Tay managed something that might have been a nod. 1,500 people dying every day, children, elderly, families. The council won't let anyone through the quarantine barrier. They say it's too risky, that the plague might spread to other worlds. Marine Roxtel checked her own scanner, confirming the cargo manifest data. "Captain, these supplies could treat the entire infected population. The antiviral compounds alone would cut the mortality rate by 60% according to their specifications." Veltok found himself facing an ethical dilemma he had never encountered in his military training. The human lying bleeding on the Deck had technically committed a serious crime by violating a Galactic Council quarantine, but he had done so in an attempt to save millions of lives, including those of children who had no say in the political decisions that condemned them to death. "Why you?" Veltok asked. "Why risk everything for a mission like this?" Tay's eyes closed for a moment, and Veltok thought he might have lost consciousness again. But then the human spoke, his words carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "Because someone had to try. Because 8 million people don't deserve to die just because helping them is inconvenient for the Council. Because sometimes doing the right thing means breaking the rules." The bridge fell silent except for the quiet hum of life support systems and the occasional beep from medical scanners. Around them, dozens of cargo containers continued to drift in space, each one containing supplies that could save countless lives on a distant world. 3 hours later, Veltok stood in the medical bay of his ship, watching displays that should have been impossible. Tay lay on the treatment table, connected to a dozen different monitoring devices, each one showing vital signs that defied everything the Relaxian captain thought he understood about biology. The human's heart rate had stabilized at what appeared to be normal levels for his species. His breathing was deep and regular. The internal bleeding that should have killed him had somehow slowed to manageable levels, though the medical bay's advanced systems couldn't explain how. Dr. Kelrin, the ship's chief medical officer, had spent the last 2 hours running diagnostics and shaking her head in bewilderment. "I've treated 17 different alien species during my career," she had told Veltok an hour earlier. "I thought I understood the limits of biological endurance. This human is rewriting medical textbooks just by continuing to breathe." Now, Tay was not only breathing but conscious, his dark eyes tracking movement around the medical bay with alert intelligence. When Veltok approached the treatment table, those eyes fixed on him with the same unwavering directness he had witnessed on the cargo ship's bridge. "Why didn't you surrender?" Veltok asked, the question that had been bothering him since the confrontation began. "We could have negotiated. There might have been a way to deliver your supplies through official channels." Tay's laugh was weak, but genuine, the sound carrying bitter experience. "Negotiate while people die? That's not how we work, Captain." He tried to sit up slightly, wincing as the movement pulled at his injuries. "How long do you think official channels would take? Weeks, months, committee meetings, impact studies, risk assessments?" The human's voice grew stronger as he continued. "Every day the Council delays, 1,500 more people die on New Busan. Children who could have lived with proper medicine. Elderly who could have survived with clean water systems. Families torn apart because bureaucrats think procedure is more important than lives." Veltok found himself accessing his personal database, pulling up historical files on human behavior that he had never bothered to study before. What he found there made his mandibles click with growing amazement and concern. The records were full of accounts that seemed to contradict basic survival instincts. Human soldiers holding defensive positions until death rather than retreating when overwhelmed. Civilians running into burning buildings to save strangers. Medical workers staying in plague zones when they could have evacuated safely. Ship crews going down with their vessels rather than abandoning passengers. The pattern was consistent and, from a military perspective, completely baffling. Most species fought to survive, fled when defeat was certain, and chose self-preservation when faced with impossible odds. It was rational, predictable behavior that formed the foundation of galactic military doctrine. Humans, apparently, operated by different rules entirely. "Your species has a documented history of choosing death over retreat," Veltok said, scrolling through more files. Military records show human units fighting to complete extinction rather than surrendering. Civilian accounts describe individuals sacrificing themselves for abstract concepts like honor or duty. He paused at a particularly disturbing account of human soldiers who had held a mountain pass for 3 days against overwhelming odds, dying to the last person rather than allowing an enemy army to reach a civilian population center. From a strategic standpoint, their sacrifice was meaningless, he continued. The enemy could have simply gone around the mountain, yet they chose to die for a gesture. Tay managed to prop himself up on his elbows, fixing Veltok with a steady gaze. "You're looking at it wrong, Captain. Those soldiers didn't die for a gesture. They died because someone had to make a stand. Someone had to say that some things are worth more than personal survival." The human's words carried the same conviction Veltok had heard on the bridge, the absolute certainty that had allowed him to continue working while bleeding to death. "Your military doctrine is based on rational cost-benefit analysis," Tay continued. "If the price is too high, you retreat. If survival is impossible, you surrender. It's logical, efficient, and completely practical." He paused, gathering strength for what he wanted to say next. "But logic alone doesn't build civilizations worth defending. Sometimes you have to be willing to pay prices that don't make sense on paper. Sometimes you have to choose principles over survival, even when survival is the smart choice." Veltok processed this, comparing it to everything he had learned during his military training. "Your species is problematic," he admitted finally. "You make decisions that defy military psychology. You fight when you should surrender, sacrifice when you should preserve yourselves." Tay smiled, the expression transforming his pale, wounded, "We prefer principled, Captain." The simple response carried enough weight to silence the medical bay. Around them, monitoring equipment continued its quiet work, tracking the vital signs of a being who had redefined Veltok's understanding of what it meant to be truly dangerous. Captain Veltok's incident report reached the Galactic Council headquarters on Nexus Prime within 6 hours of the confrontation. The transmission contained detailed scans, video recordings of the encounter, and most importantly, Veltok's personal testimony about what he had witnessed aboard the human cargo vessel. The report landed on the desk of Council Administrator Thexrin, a methodical being who had processed thousands of similar cases during his career. Quarantine violations were serious but routine matters, typically resulting in swift prosecution and imprisonment. The administrator expected to rubber stamp another execution order and move on to the next case. Instead, he found himself reading the same paragraphs multiple times, unable to process what Veltok was describing. Subject continued mission-critical activities while sustaining injuries that should have resulted in immediate incapacitation, the report stated. Multiple plasma rifle discharges failed to deter subject from completing cargo jettison sequence. Medical scans confirmed fatal-level damage throughout the engagement. Administrator Thexrin called for additional documentation, demanding full medical reports and psychological evaluations. What he received challenged everything the Council thought they knew about human behavior patterns. Kim Tay faced execution within 72 hours of his arrest. The charges were clear: willful violation of Galactic Council Quarantine Protocol 7 Alpha, endangerment of galactic health security, and smuggling of restricted materials into a contaminated zone. Under normal circumstances, the trial would have been a formality lasting less than an hour. But Veltok's testimony changed everything. Standing before the Council's Judicial Committee, the Relaxian captain described a species that operated outside the boundaries of rational self-interest. He spoke of a being who chose mission completion over personal survival, who continued fighting while dying, who displayed no fear when faced with superior firepower. "Council members," Veltok said, his forearms gesturing for emphasis, "we are dealing with a species that will die before abandoning their core values. Traditional deterrence methods are not only ineffective against humans, they may actually strengthen their resolve." The Judicial Committee ordered an immediate investigation into the New Busan situation. What they discovered made several council members resign in shame. The plague affecting the human colony world was indeed serious, but it was also completely manageable with proper medical supplies. The antiviral compounds Tai had been smuggling would have reduced mortality rates by 70%. The water purification systems could have eliminated the disease entirely within 6 months. More damaging to the Council's reputation was the revelation that the quarantine had been maintained not for health reasons, but to avoid political complications with the Zelthian Empire, whose territory bordered the human colony. The Zelthians had expressed concerns about increased human traffic near their space lanes, and the Council had found it easier to maintain the quarantine than negotiate a new trade agreement. 8 million human lives had been deemed less important than diplomatic convenience. The scandal rocked the galactic government. Protests erupted on dozens of worlds as other species realized their own colonies might face similar abandonment during future crises. Public pressure forced the Council to lift the New Busan quarantine immediately, allowing humanitarian supplies to flow freely to the colony world. 6 months later, new first contact protocols were distributed to every military unit in the galaxy. Section 7 Delta contained specific warnings about human psychological warfare capabilities that would have seemed like science fiction just a year earlier. Species demonstrates willingness to accept death rather than compromise core values. The protocol stated in stark military language. Standard intimidation tactics ineffective and may prove counterproductive. Humans interpret threats as challenges rather than deterrents. Recommend negotiation and compromise over displays of force when dealing with Terran personnel. The new protocols included mandatory cultural sensitivity training for all officers likely to encounter human vessels. The training emphasized that humans viewed certain principles as more important than personal survival, making them unpredictable and potentially dangerous opponents. Tay recovered fully from his injuries, defying medical predictions once again. When offered a commendation and substantial monetary reward for his actions, he declined both, choosing instead to return to running cargo between frontier worlds. He said he had work to do and people depending on him. The Rylaxian fleet, impressed by human medical knowledge and determination, began carrying human advisors on their missions. These advisors proved invaluable not just for their medical expertise, but for their ability to think outside conventional military doctrine. Captain Veltak, now promoted to admiral, often reflected on the lesson he had learned aboard that drifting cargo vessel. In his private journal he wrote, "Today I discovered that sometimes the most dangerous weapon in the galaxy is not superior firepower or advanced technology. Sometimes it is simply someone who refuses to quit, no matter the cost." The entry became required reading at the Galactic Military Academy, where future officers learned that victory was not always determined by who had the bigger guns, but by who was willing to pay the highest price for their beliefs.